Hey guys, and welcome in to the first episode of the 2K Play Now online review series. So, the first episode that we're going to be doing is the 2001 and 2002 Sacramento Kings. So, with these reviews, what's going to be the format, the general format is I'm going to do, a short introduction on the team, and I'm going to get into the meat and gritty, really speaking, of what makes this team great in 2K, how to use them, their plays, etc., stuff like that. So, quick backstory on the 2001-2002 Kings. I will say that the reason that they are going first is that they are my favorite team of all time. So, that's not to say I think that they're the best team of all time. I'm going to get that straight off my chest right now, that they are not the best team of all time. I will just tell you that right now. But they are my favorite team to watch. Now, I wasn't alive to say I watched them live, but I will say that this team really separates itself in my eyes just based on how they played for the time, So they were essentially the Warriors of today with the insane ball movement, the big men who could post play make. Everyone bought into the system. They shot very well. They passed very well. They moved very well. They defended as a team. So this team was really, I think, if I'm thinking of any team that really got screwed out of a championship, this is the first one that comes to my mind, because I think that they are the best team to not win a championship of the normal teams. Obviously, we're not counting the 73-9 Warriors, but anywho, so I think they got screwed out of a championship, and so I took the honor of watching all their game footage and doing all this stuff to try and give you guys the best experience with this team. So first and foremost, you got to talk about two players straight off the bat, and that is Chris Webber and Peja Stojakovic. So I'm going to start with Chris Webber because he's a little bit easier to talk about than Peja Stojakovic. But Chris Webber essentially is a machine in this game. So he doesn't have every single badge that's necessary in the game. So I think back down Punisher, I wish he had Intimidator. I wish he had. But for the most part, he has essentially every badge that you could possibly need out of a big man. He has every good stat that you could possibly need. I will say with Chris Webber, he is probably the least used best superstar that I've ever played with in 2K. You never see this team online. I think I maybe have seen him once. And honestly, I think I was the one that was using him, now that I think about it. I take it back. I've seen him twice. So yes, I have actually seen them once before. The first guy didn't know what he was doing with them, and the second guy also didn't know what he was doing with them. But he was also against me with the 06-07 Cavaliers, which that's a video for another time. But this Kings team, this offense has to straight up run through the post. So Chris Webber is your main threat with that. I'll get to Divac in a second, but we'll get to the whole shebang in a second. But anywho, Chris Webber is a machine in this game. He has drop stepper, so you'll be able to move around with that. He has post spin technician. On the defensive end, he has rebound chaser, box. He's got chase down artist, rim protector. Like the man's a beast. There is a few games where he'll score, 25 points, grab you 7, 8, 9 boards, give you 4 or 5 assists, and give you 3, 4 blocks. Like, he is a general all-around beast. Now, his playmaking in game isn't nearly as good as it was in real life, nor do I think he could be as dominant because he lacks that back down punisher that the really high-end level power forwards, centers have. But I will say with Chris Webber, he is just so lightning quick on the ball. I think, realistically speaking, there's only 2 big men that I can think of off the top of my head that I've used that are quicker than Chris Webber from the power forward slot on the classic teams. And that would be, I would say, Larry Johnson and I would say Kevin Garnett. I think those are the only 2 that can rival him in athleticism. But as you'll see in this gameplay, there's multiple games where it's he just takes over. He just bullies his opponent. He'll block on one end, he'll run out the other end, and he'll just get an absolutely emphatic stuff on the other end. And it's just he'll take over a game and you'll just be like, wow, this is one of the best players in 2K. And it's like an average, I would say, if you know what you're doing in the post, I would say an average stat line that you should aim to get is around 18-20 points, 7 to 12 boards. I would say 4 or 5 assists, and I would say you could probably get 2 blocks and a steal or 2 every single game if you play your cards right. Because, I mean, realistically speaking, right, he's big enough that he can play the 5 but he's quick enough that he can guard out on a 5-out and recover back to the paint. He's quick enough to guard the perimeter. Now, you shouldn't do that all the time, but for the defensive sake of doing that, yeah, you can switch. You can just straight up switch. So when you get like Doug Christie and Chris Webber pick and roll, just switch it because both of them are emphatically good at their positions, or Gerald Wallace as well. We'll get to those two in a bit. But essentially, what you got is lightning in the bottle with Chris Webber. Like, he's big enough to punish the people who go 5-out with the small lineups. He's big enough to hold his own against the monsters in the game. But he's quick enough to punish those guys because most of those times, those guys aren't as quick as him. So, realistically speaking, you got one of the best power forwards in the game, and your offense has to absolutely run through him. I would say the only way that I can feel you can unlock his passing is if you have designed plays. It's a lot harder to unlock passing in this game from the big men if you don't have a design play. So a play that you'll see me run with the Spurs later on in these review series is like, I think it's called Horns Dive or Horns Pitch or something like. It's like one of those two, where it's like the point guard will get the ball from the power forward. I swear, if you run that with Chris Webber, you could probably get this offense really good and functioning and running. Another play I can think of at the top of my head is if you can have a play that's in the 89 Pistons playbook, where it has the center / power forward inbound the ball to the small forward or another player. If you can set that up where it's high-low action with Chris Webber and Vlade Divac, you essentially have, a bucket every time because they can't help off of Chris Webber if he's in the high post because he's just going to knock down the mid-range. And the play is set up to where Peja Stojakovic is waiting at the top of the key. So if they double and then instantly recover with the small forward, then you're going to have Peja Stojakovic set up wide open in the three-point line, which you'll see in a second that is not a good idea. But Chris Webber is probably the first option. I remember there was a game I was playing against the Suns where he did hit a three-pointer. I will say that was pure luck. I didn't intend to hit that three-pointer with him. It was meant to be a mid-range. He just popped out to the three-point line. But yeah, honestly, if you're one of those that just picks and rolls all the time, just pick and fade with him and you're going to get a bucket every time because they can't help off of him. And if they do help off of him and they're like one of those that button smashes to recover to the shot, just give him a pump fake. You can go right on around. And you just can get an emphatic slam down low. If they help off of that, then you could just kick it out to a shooter on the wing. But yeah, Chris Webber, I mean, he's just a dominant player. I mean, there was a game I played against the Clippers that he had like 4 blocks in the first quarter alone. And then he had the game-saving block at the very end. It's like he just gets these like stupid plays that it just drops your jaw, like the way he can just control the game on the whole court. So the second player that I said that we should instantly mention is Peja Stojakovic, right? This guy is a sharpshooter of the highest extent. He is going to hit every single semi-open shot that you can give him. Now, I will say his form at first, it has a little hitch in it. So if you're one of those that goes off the timing without the arrow to the side, where it's like it shows if it's slightly layered, so like how far it's progressing. I will say if you're one of those that goes without that, make sure you account for the hitch, because the hitch, when I first used him, made him one of the worst players in the game because I could never time his shots, even though he was a sharpshooter. It's the same thing with Larry Bird, even though Bird is really good. I could never time the shots until I got used to the hitch. But I will say that Peja Stojakovic, he is a sharpshooter by definition. He's kind of slow on defense. So you're gonna have to hide him on defense on someone who's bad, even though his defensive stat for perimeter says like A- or something like that, or like A or something like that. He's not that good. He's not that good. He doesn't have any defensive badges. He's an offensive weapon through and through. But yeah, so once it gets down to the crunch time, you got to go to Peja. If they sag off him at any point, just bury them. Honestly, if they're just like one of those that uses the center and drops, just pick and roll him, and you're gonna have an open look every time. And I mean, like, he will take over a game with the shooting, or he will save you with the shooting. If you give him if it just says wide open, so long as you get it any somewhere near slightly late, you're gonna be good. Like if it's in the mid range or the 3-point line. Now, his weakness is the fact that he's extremely slow, and the fact that he has no interior game. If he was a 3-level scorer, then it becomes really scary. But with Peja Stojakovic, essentially what you've got is mainly a perimeter scorer. So with Chris Webber and Peja Stojakovic, I mean, you're going to see the footage in this now. There was a game against the Bulls where I was just absolutely horrible for the first, quarter, and then Chris Webber had gotten cold. Peja wasn't hitting his open shots because I wasn't timing it right, because it was going off the dribble as opposed to just a set shot. But it was bad. This guy was, I would say he was pretty handling me pretty well. And then out of nowhere, Chris Webber and Peja Stojakovic, they just take turns in the second, third, and fourth quarter, just taking over the game at separate points. So Chris Webber got hot in the third quarter. Peja was keeping me alive in the second. In the fourth quarter, once it got to crunch time, they both took turns. Specifically in crunch time, Peja hit a ton of clutch shots. There was a shot against the Suns. I was playing a guy who was using Suns. He was handling me, pretty well with Devin Booker, but Peja got like a semi bit of space, knocked down the 3-point jump shot, and straight up, it was game over from there because it was like a 2-point game. The shot clock was running down. I greened the shot and it went in because he had the clutch shooter. So even though it was pretty contested, it had enough that I could green it. But yeah, I will say that Peja Stojakovic and Chris Webber, those are your two main offensive weapons. Your second or your tertiary and quaternary, I believe that's the term for it, weapons are Vlade Divac and Mike Bibby. Now, here's a little tidbit about Vlade Divac. He's actually surprisingly good on the offensive end. His mid-range is not nearly as good as Chris Webber, but he has the backdown Punisher badge. He has all the other offensive badges that you really need for a center in this game. But so his offense is really, really nice. So it's a good 1-2 punch to have with Chris Webber and Vlade Divac. They can both space the floor. So if the guy doubles on Chris Webber, you can just kick it out to the mid-range. Vlade Divac will hit it. He also does have that hitch in his shot. But yeah, so I will say that Vlade Divac, I think it's kind of hard to say he's more offensively skilled than Chris Webber on the offensive end, but they're pretty similar. I think Chris Webber's athleticism makes him a lot better than Vlade Divac. But Vlade Divac is not to sleep on, especially on defense. I remember there was a play, he actually got a block on Michael Jordan on a dunk attempt, which is, if you play this game, you know how hard that is. I have a couple of footages of it happening, but it does not happen that often. Once Jordan gets that dunk animation started, it's pretty damn hard to get him to not get that dunk going. Which is fair. It's Michael Jordan. But yeah, Divac is actually a solid rim protector. Again, he doesn't have the Intimidator badge. The only one that does have that is Doug Christie, who again I'll get to in a second. But I would say that Divac does actually do a pretty good job of protecting the rim with the silver rim protector. He's not nearly as good on the boards as you would like. That's not to say he's bad, but you can force, some rebounds if you double team on a super freak like Giannis or something like that. If you're up against the Giannis, you can, double with Webber and Divac and not pay the price because Webber is quick enough to recover. Divac is strong enough to hold his own in the post. So it's like you got versatility with Vlade Divac. He's also a playmaker, just like Chris Webber. Again, unfortunately, he's not as quick as Webber, so he can't punish if the guy, sags off. And that hitch in his jump shot, that's the main difference between him and Webber when it comes to shooting, because Webber can get his shots off a lot quicker than Divac can, so meaning that they're a lot less contested, whereas his hit shots really make it kind of hard for him to hit the shots, mid-range shots, whenever the guy is sagging off, because they can just instantly recover and make it contested, and you're going to miss. However, that's not to say that it's a bad mid-range shot. It's probably better that it's going to hit 9 times out of 10 if it's wide open, as opposed to if it's just open or 5% covered or something like that. It's a lot easier to hit with that. But as for Mike Bibby, now I've only recently gotten into using Mike Bibby as a scorer. However, I will say that for the first bit, he was basically just a decoy out there. He was just there for defense and playmaking. I'm not going to kid and say that, oh my gosh, I unlocked Mike Bibby. He was amazing. He got me 10 points and 7 assists. No, if he scored, it would be kind of surprising. I'm going to be honest. It was like he might score 2 points. He would give me like 5 to 8 assists or something like that. He was just there to floor general because he has that badge. So it's like it boosted the teammates' overall attributes on offense. So it's like, honestly, I didn't really use Mike Bibby until recently. Now, I do hit some shots in this gameplay with Mike Bibby, and he can hit those shots. You can definitely hit the mid-range if you leave him open. The problem with hitting the mid-range as a point guard is it's a lot harder to get the open look unless you set a pick. So unless you have like a play that's just magical for Mike Bibby, you're not really going to be able to use that too often, unless the guy is like one of those where he just sags off of the big man and doubles with the point guard to try and steal the ball. In which case, then yes, you're going to be able to punish it because his playmaking is good enough that if you can read ahead of what the defensive guy is going to do, you can make the quick passes. You can get either Doug Christie a good look or Stojakovic a good look. If you're a good shooter, you're going to be able to hit the shot. But I would say that Mike Bibby is kind of an unused weapon that I've had. I've still yet to get like a game where he just takes over the game. He'll get an occasional putback randomly. He'll make a nice layup every once in a while. But for the most part, when I use him, he just gets blocked at the rim. It's kind of disappointing. So I feel kind of bad at that. Now, Doug Christie is an interesting case. Now, he has no offensive game, and that's weird because he has like a B for his three-pointer and like an A+ for his mid-range or an A for his mid-range. He has no offensive game whatsoever because his shot takes so damn long to load that it's almost impossible for me to time it because I always keep thinking I got to rush this before it comes contested, even though I have more time than I think. So it's kind of annoying. I don't think I've actually hit a jump shot with Doug Christie yet. I'm not going to kid. I have hit like a tough layup or two, but for the most part, Doug Christie does not score for me. So keep that in mind. He is, for me at least, a defensive specialist, which is funny because I actually hit a three-pointer with this 99 2000s version, even though that one's like, the one in the Raptors is like so much worse offensively. It was funny, but so Doug Christie, for me, was a defensive specialist. I just stick him on the opponent's best scorer. He does the job. I'm not saying he's going to lock up every single perimeter scorer. You'll see someone who does do a fairly good job at that. But I think Doug Christie is more a defensive specialist for me. Now, if you can, set him up with a pick and roll or something like that, then yeah, you can probably unlock Doug Christie, get yourself some few points. So with this offense on the Kings, you can genuinely get like an average of 65, 70 points with just the starting lineup alone if you know what you're doing. If you can get 20 and 20 from Stojakovic and Weber, which is honestly, that's pretty realistic. I think you could definitely do that in this game. I could see Stojakovic getting 23 and 3 or something like that, and Weber doing, Weber things. You can get 15 and 8 or 9 with Divac. You can easily get like 8 with both Christie and Bibby. So that's a good chunk of offense right there. I mean, that's about 17 points. I mean, you can genuinely get that with this offense. Now, what makes the Kings a little bit better than most tier 1 teams is their bench. They have a full bench. For these historic teams to have a full bench, it's kind of surprising. But I will say that their bench is probably equally not great at shooting, but also great at their role. So Bobby Jackson is an extremely quick point guard. He's very good at finishing at the rim. He's very good at, shot creating, essentially. He's a shot creator. He's not good at defense whatsoever. You're not going to lock up someone with his defense. But his offense is a quick spark off the bench. I have had games where he has taken over a little bit, where he'll get like 6-8 points in a row just off drives and pull-ups. But he's a little bit more offensively gifted than Bibby for me, which is kind of weird because his whole stats are worse. But I would say that he's a very solid backup point guard. He's very quick, as I've mentioned. And his playmaking is actually kind of underrated. So you can get 6 and 7 off the bench from him, 6.7 assists. But to me, the best player on the bench for the Kings is Gerald Wallace. And I know that's weird because he has essentially no offensive game. But his defense, you can put him on essentially every player in the game because he has an A+ for perimeter and an A for or A+ for paint and A for perimeter. So it's like his defense is good enough that whenever someone does a pick and roll against him with Weber and Stojakovic or someone like that, you can just switch it. That's one of the few ones where I'm like, if it's Giannis getting the pick and he gets switched on him, I'm fine. I'll live with the result. Or Durant getting Weber off of him, you'll live with the result. He is that good on defense that you can put him against the center and he can hold his own. Now, he doesn't have the Intimidator badge. I wish he did, because that would make him like one of the most broken players in the game. If he had the Intimidator and clamps, he probably should, just with the stats that he has. But I will say that he's insanely athletic, so he can get, a block every once in a while. His main attribute is just non-stop defense. However, there was a few times where, you know, his athleticism, he has like limitless takeoff or something like that on like silver or gold, and he'll take off and it'll just drop your jaw with the athleticism. Like there was one against the Bucks where he just absolutely dropped the hammer on, I think like a Baca or a Giannis or something like that. He just dropped the hammer on them. So it's nice to have that up your sleeve. But Gerald Wallace is like 9 times out of 10 going to be your, you know, defensive specialist. A little bit more than Doug Christie. He has a lot worse offense. Again, he does occasionally drop the hammer on someone, so it is kind of funny to see that. But I will say, Gerald Wallace is your bench guy, and then the backup, the Walmart version of Peja Stojakovic is going to be Hedo Turkoglu. His playmaking is actually surprisingly good compared to what you would expect from a small forward. His shooting is not as great as it would be in later years, specifically the one that's on the Clippers or the one that would be on the Magic. He's not that good of a shooter in this version. You can definitely hit shots with him, but it's not his forte. But he is nice to have. You know, you can sub him in for Weber to keep up the shooting, or you can sub him in for Stojakovic to get a slow, you know, basically the same player, but just a lot worse, you know, like same archetype, if I may. But yeah, so I will say that these players, you know, on the bench, those are like the main 3 guys. You can have Scott Pollard add to that list with his mid-range shooting. But honestly, I never really noticed his paint defense. I kind of noticed his rebounding every once in a while on his mid-range shooting, but he also has the hitch. So it's like he's a good role player, but not a great role player. Because if he was faster, I would say then he would go into a pretty good role player. You know, pretty solid role player that can play, you know, consistent minutes. But him and Divac are essentially the same person. I think Divac is obviously a little bit better because he has a lot more post moves and a lot better in the post. But yeah, so that is basically the Kings. You have Lawrence Funderburk as well on that team. I never really play him. Chucky Brown. This is not the best version of him. That's the one on the Cavs because that's the only version of him that I've hit a shot with. But yes, so I will say that this Kings team, you got a solid team. I could see you definitely going on a win streak with this team. This team, you know, there's not really many weaknesses per se, and you can match up with essentially every team in the game. You can match up with essentially every style in the game. You can punish any type of player in the game. The ones who drop, just beat them with the pick and roll. The ones who play zone, you can just shoot them out of the zone with Peja Stojakovic. That does happen in some of the footages. Peja will literally like start catching fire in the game. So I will say that this team is probably not as good as they are in real life, but they are no slouch in this game, and I think you should definitely give them a try. So thank you all for listening. Thank you guys all for watching. Shout out to my editor again. I'll link him in the description if you guys want to talk to him, if you need a video, if you like what you see. But yes, so thank you guys all for watching. This is a review on the 2001-2002 Kings, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace.